Let's get physical. Physical. Let me hear your body talk. I will stop. I'm sorry. Listen, that was bad. The rest of the episode is going to be good, I promise. Grab your leggings, grab your leg warmers. Cue Olivia Newton-John, the author of Let's Get Physical, is in the house. This interview promises to take you back, like flashback potentially. You'll recognize some of the names, and some historic women's fitness icons will possibly be new. Are you getting physical? This episode is sponsored by the Flipping 55 Day Flip. 5, probably 15 minutes at most, exercise videos that you can do in the convenience of your home. It's a great start, a restart, or if you are like me and sometimes do way too much and it's working way too little, sometimes a reset and doing less is what you need, but we can't just quit like a smoker needs something in their hands. You need something to do on a daily basis. This is it. The link to that will be in the show notes. I'm Deborah Atkinson. You're listening to Flipping 50, where I address your top struggles and concerns and really hope to inspire you. I share what to eat, how to move, and how to change your mindset, sometimes about both of those, so you can have the energy, vitality, and look forward to your second half like it's going to be better than the first. All right, let's dive in to this episode. My guest today, Danielle Friedman, is an award-winning journalist whose feature writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Cut, Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, Glamour, Health, and other publications. She has worked as a senior editor at NBC News Digital and The Daily Beast, and she began her career as a nonfiction book editor at the Penguin imprint, Hudson Street Press, and Plume. Friedman lives in New York City with her husband and son, and I'm so very glad to have you here today, Danielle. Thanks for taking a break on your whirlwind tour, no doubt, to be here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Okay, so I'm dying to know. So we got a brief insight into your entire career here, and that's a lot of prestigious names. I mean, everybody listening recognizes probably the majority of them. Has writing always been your passion? I mean, were you, as a little child, were you walking around with a pen and paper, or how did this roll out?
I always love beginning at the very beginning. So, yes, it really has. My favorite subject in high school was English. I was an English major in college, and I actually began my career as you mentioned, as a book editor. But it took about 5 years for me to figure out that I really wanted to be on the other side of the table, so to speak, the one doing the writing. I also, I think I am very much a product of my family. My dad and now my younger sister are both physicians, and my mom and older sister are both English teachers and writers, respectively. And so for me, writing about health and medicine and science sort of has fused, my upbringing into one career path.
I love this story. So the next question is kind of twofold. Why this book? And okay, for our listeners and myself, this is like a trip down memory lane. But what about you? I mean, you're just a little bit younger and you don't have the 40 years of experience watching exercise evolve and science completely change. What made you interested in writing this particular book?
Sure. And I feel I should mention I did turn 40 last year. And so I feel as if it was actually a wonderful experience to be writing this book and interviewing amazing women in their 80s and 90s about aging during that milestone. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. So for most of my career as an editor and as a writer, I have written about various aspects of women's health. I've written a lot about women's reproductive and sexual health, issues involving motherhood and fertility and pregnancy. and other issues just relating to women's overall well-being. So in that sense, the book is very much an outgrowth of my journalism career until now. But I hadn't really written much about fitness. I am a lifelong runner, a very slow but passionate and steady runner. And I come from
my kind of girl, actually.
Yeah. My advice to anyone who says they don't like running is always just go slower and see if that helps. But and I, I've always been a very active person, and so this book came about when I decided to try barre classes for the first time. And it was that type of boutique fitness was different than anything I had ever done. And I became kind of intrigued by the history of barre. And in particular, I had noticed that many of the moves in class felt a little bit sort of sexual. There's, the pelvic tilts and thrusts. And so at that point, and this was about 5 years ago, I decided to look into whether barre classes could actually benefit women's sexual health. Well, one thing led to another, one rabbit hole led to another, and I stumbled on the story of Lottie Burke, the woman who invented what evolved into contemporary barre in the late 1950s. And Lottie is this fascinating, complicated, very flawed, very larger than life figure who, sure enough, did create her workout partially to help women improve their sex lives. I wrote about Lottie for New York Magazine's The Cut, and the story went viral, which I really spoke to the fact that I think a lot of people, even in the barre world, were unfamiliar with its origins. But in telling her story, I also just discovered that there was a much bigger story here about the history and rise of women's fitness. I couldn't believe actually that this book hadn't been written and this story hadn't been told. And I felt it was just a very important story in tracking how our culture evolved from being one that really actively discouraged women from sweating and physically exerting themselves in the 1950s and 60s into the world that we live in today, where women's fitness is so ubiquitous.
Wow, so good. Okay, I'm having a hard time. I'm like, should I ask her this or that? I want to ask them all right now. But you kind of alluded to one of the questions that I had, and that was, did you interview some of these fitness icons? So if you would or want to share a little bits and pieces, I mean, who else did you interview? Those people who were iconic to maybe some of us and still alive and thriving.
Yes. I was very fortunate that almost everybody that I reached out to was open to speaking with me and excited to speak with me and to kind of have their story and their contributions, be part of the historical record. My book opens with the story of Bonnie Pruden, who's really a fitness pioneer that's kind of been forgotten by history. She passed away, but her longtime associate and friend has maintained her archives in her home for all these years. And so I did get to spend time sort of immersed in Bonnie's world and with one of her closest friends. I spent time with and interviewed Lottie Burke's daughter, Esther Fairfax, who's now at 87 and still teaches her mother's method occasionally. I interviewed Catherine Switzer, the amazing running pioneer. Yeah, the first woman to run the Boston Marathon with a number, and who went on to open so many doors for women runners. I know I feel like I'm giving you a list now, but I just get so excited about the people I got to speak with. I mean, Judy Shepard-Missett, the founder and creator of Jazzercise.
There's a hush all over the world. Just like come into my mind.
Yes. And Tammy Lee Webb, the star of Buns of Steel and Abs of Steel. And in the Jane Fonda chapter, I did try, and I had many people actually try on my behalf to interview Jane Fonda, including very close associates who I did interview, but that interview did not come together. Thankfully, she is such a prolific writer and has and has written so openly about her life that I was able to, between what she's already written and interviewing dozens of her former, fitness colleagues, I was able to tell her story. And that was pretty cool. I mean, I interviewed many of the women who appeared alongside her in her videos, the composers for the music in her videos, and the wardrobe people, and the Lenny Kasdan, the woman who actually taught Jane her workout, and and just so many of these sort of sideline figures that were partially responsible for Jane Fonda's workout becoming a global phenomenon.
I'm so glad you shared that, because that, of course, was one of the questions that I wanted to know if you talked to her. I've reached out to her too, and I can't get through.
She's a busy lady.
I'm glad to know it's not just me, but I will say for listeners, I've recently read her books as well, and it was a huge eye opener. I had never realized this before, that the reason, the stimulus behind her starting her videos in the first place was as a way to make money for her cause. It wasn't, it didn't start as, I'm going to do these videos and make a lot of money. And there was a reason and a purpose. It was the vehicle for her platform. I had no idea.
And it was really her husband's cause. It was her then husband, Tom Hayden's cause, his political PAC and campaign. So I think that part of her history has really, until now, sort of gone largely unnoted.
So my piggyback off of that is, as you went through, were there other surprises? I mean, what stands out as a big shock to you, or just a big awareness you didn't have before you began?
Well, on a sort of overarching level, I was very surprised by just how recently women were discouraged from exercising, and just how recently myths, these sort of medical myths about what vigorous exercise could do to a woman's body, persisted. So many women that I interviewed who grew up in the 40s and 50s talked about how, being told that if they pushed themselves too hard, their uterus could fall out, or running would turn them into a man. They would grow, body hair in unwanted places, and just in general, exercise, unless it was of a very kind of gentle variety, and even maybe a dance-based variety, was really considered unladylike. So fitness today is so, like I said, ubiquitous, and the fitness industry is such a major force. I think many young women especially don't realize that it's a pretty new, privilege and opportunity to be able to engage with exercise in the way that we do today. And then there were a lot of fun little surprises along the way. All of the backstories that I encountered about the gear that women wear to exercise were very fun and delightful, including the fact that the sports bra wasn't invented until 1977. That to me is a bit of a travesty, but the original prototype was made from sewing together two jock straps, and the first, Lycra leotards were sort of an outgrowth of the girdle, in that, and you could say kind of feminist repurposing of the girdle, in that Lycra was invented to create like more modern girdles, and then women began ditching their girdles, and instead it became this fiber of fitness, and for some women of liberation. So I really loved learning those secret histories, and also just seeing how all of the movements and many of the figures in the book were kind of interconnected and standing on their foremothers, shoulders into the next, throughout the eras.
I love it. Love all of the context that you're giving. So you have said these words, so it's like a historical record. What other words would you use to describe the book? If somebody were thinking, I'm going to read this will it read to me like a story, or is it more like a chronological history?
Great question. And when the fact that you used the word story, you took the words out of my mouth. As I was writing the book, I did feel it was a very important history, and I wanted it to be, on the historical record. But my journalism training has really taught me that if I wanted people to actually read the book, I also had to make it an enjoyable read. And my goal was really to write it in a way that was as novelistic and even cinematic as possible. So, to tell a very compelling story and to bring to bring these fitness pioneers to life. I really I tried to get inside their heads and in their shoes and really put a human face on this history and on the birth of the fitness industry. So, I did my best to to achieve that, and also to infuse the book with a sense of movement and energy, because, I think when you're writing about a topic like exercise, it definitely helps if the story captures, sort of matches the subject in being lively and spirited.
Love it. All right. I can't wait to get my hands really into it a little bit deeper. So I've got to ask you this. So you've now taken this deep dive in. You personally kind of are vested in activity, physical fitness. If you had a crystal ball, what would you predict for women's fitness in the future?
Well, I think on a very simple level, and this is part a prediction and partly, I suppose, a hope. My hope is that we are moving into an era where women embrace moving in ways that make them genuinely feel good, and that benefit mental health and emotional health, and that can serve as a reminder of what their bodies can do, and not what their bodies are lacking. For so much of the history that I write about, for all of the empowering aspects of exercise for women who are denied the ability to, the opportunities really to exercise in previous generations, there was also a message that women needed to shape their body to meet a very specific, narrow ideal of beauty to be loved. And that one of the sort of, driving forces of fitness is that women should basically treat their bodies as a project that they should be working on forever from a cosmetic standpoint. And so for, so many women, that has infused their experiences of exercise with feelings of guilt and shame, and sort of, just created some very tricky terrain. In the past 5 years, we've started to see a subtle shift in the way that fitness professionals talk about what their workouts are for, and use different language to motivate women, language that's more geared toward feeling good and feeling strong, as opposed to striving for a bikini body. And we're starting to see some, more representation of what fit bodies can look like. And then when you add in the pandemic, which of course has led to this just widespread reevaluation of, I think, so many of our priorities. I have been sort of hearing and seeing glimmers of a move away from the hardcore, drenched in sweat kind of workouts that have dominated, and toward movement again that really that makes us feel good about ourselves, and that just makes us feel good from a health perspective.
Yeah. So encouraged to see and hear that being done by my colleagues.
Mm.
I'm going to ask you this. So I'm in it. All right.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So I want you as an outsider who's writing about it and
mm-hmm.
participating in it to comment on this. There is a feeling among many of us that we as the fitness industry have definitely served confusion,
Mm,
conflict as far as what should I be doing
mm,
and do weights cause bulk
mm,
and mythology is still here
mm-hmm,
in
mm-hmm,
we're in 2022.
mm-hmm.
What do you say to my perceptions and honestly, it's a huge mission of mine that we elevate and level up the fitness industry so we are helping give a more clear, unified message going forward.
Oh, what a a great question, and I feel a burden of responsibility in answering it. Um, I mean, the fact that you're even asking the question, having me on, I think is a great is very encouraging. But I guess I mean, one thing to keep in mind that I've just heard from many of the women I interviewed is that um, not everybody exercises because they want to change. You know, they don't want to, whether it's their aesthetic appearance, their superficial appearance, or even their inner self. I mean, I think so many of us are drawn to fitness because there is the promise of bettering ourselves and cultivating such important and wonderful sort of forms of inner strength, but it doesn't have to be about transformation. So I think if the industry can look for ways to encourage self acceptance, support self acceptance while also um, supporting women in maintaining just that sort of feeling good. I think that that will take a lot of the pressure off of women when they enter fitness spaces.
Love that. So I'd also like to ask you from your perspective. So you're 40. Your mom, I'm hoping is still living.
She
a-
is.
and potentially your grandmother, depending on your birth order, probably. But looking at like generationally in your family,
Mm-hmm.
what have you seen? And many women will be able to relate to this. I
Mm-hmm.
remember having a conversation a couple of years ago with my mom, who was 93, about what it was like in exercise through the decades because it really
Mm-hmm.
changed during her adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
What have you seen, and what are feelings that your mother has that are unique and different from yours?
Mm. Well, and I was thinking about this when you mentioned that I haven't, I did not live through much of the history that I write about, um, but truly some of my earliest memories of life are accompanying my mom to aerobics, in the back seat of her Buick, and then hanging out in the babysitting area while she danced. And so I think for me, part of my interest in telling this story was sort of also exploring that part of my own, identity and family story. I I come from a very active family. My dad is a runner, and he and I still train for and run races together. Um, uh, my mom, it's interesting. So yeah, my mom was not an exerciser growing up. I mean, it's interesting. It's not surprising given what I've what I write about, but she really just had no interest really in being physically active in that way. And it wasn't until aerobics took off in the early 80s that she started making physical activity a major part of her life. And it really served as a gateway experience for her. And she still does cardio dance, and she plays tennis, and she walks, and she's 70, 73. So, um, Actually, she just turned 74. um, and 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 so, I'm very fortunate in that I think, I grew up with these models of working out for joy, and I saw how much joy exercise provided both of my parents. And so that did help me. I think it helped to develop sort of an innate interest and pull toward it. But I think that the opportunities, and when women of my generation and certainly younger women think about their potential, I think we've seen a lot of progress from the era when my mom grew up or was a mom raising myself and my sisters. I think the fact that CrossFit is as popular as it is, and boot camps, and so many of these more hardcore workouts, and I think girls today are just growing up with a different mindset about their options. And I know I was just espousing moving in ways that feel good. And I want to clarify that looks different for everybody. It can be a HIIT workout, a boot camp, or a sweat drenching workout, or it can be taking a invigorating 30-minute walk. So I think it's all about options.
Yes. So love that. And I think our listeners are very, very used to me talking about at this point in their lives. Many of them are perimenopause, approaching menopause, in the hot moment of it, or postmenopause, and realize that what they used to do doesn't work anymore. But yet that was something they learned at a very impressionable time. And you're busy building your career, driving the minivan, raising the kids. And then all of a sudden you look up and say, I've got to do something. You default to what you know, what you knew. And it's that realization that it's changed, right? You have a different set of hormones than you did. And that's the evolution, I think, that is so big as well. Tell me if this appears in the book at all. Otherwise, I have an idea for your second one. So, and that is that, there's only 39% of all exercise sports medicine research features females. And looking at females from the perspective that there's about 7 major hormonal changes women go through, men don't. And every one of them demands a unique exercise prescription. So if it were divided, distributed evenly, and we know it's probably not, that means less than 10%. It's actually less than 6% of all research features women in any phase they're in. That means we've been, lots of us, gambling for a long time. Did that come up, or is that just like part 2?
So that has come up in my research. It is not included in this book. I actually, as I mentioned, I've written a lot about the more scientific aspects of health and medicine in the past, but this book really, sort of leans more toward the cultural. But no, I mean, I think you raise a very important point, and I have long been, I guess just interested in doing what I can to increase the percentage of women in clinical trials and research of all kinds. And I think, for me, the experience, especially of being pregnant and having a child and discovering how little is still known about women's bodies and so many of these, universal experiences that we go through. I think we're at the very beginning of sort of just women's pursuit of equity and health and wellness when it comes to our physicality.
I love that. Okay, so I have to know. So, what's next for you? I mean, is it more exercise, fitness, history books, or what kinds of projects interest you? And maybe does one roll out while you're working on one?
Mm. Well, I will say that I loved the experience of researching and writing this book. I loved the process, and I'm so grateful for that because it's a long process. I've been working on it, for almost 5 years, and so I know that I want to write more books. I know that, and there's a few kernels of ideas, threads that I need to pull on. But I don't have a firm topic yet. I really feel grateful that we're living in a time when women's historical contributions are sort of being reconsidered and elevated. And I just feel very fortunate that I had the opportunity to surface the stories of the women that I write about in my book. So I think if there's another chapter of women's history that deserves, that sort of falls into my Venn diagram of interests, and I would be very excited to tell that story.
So good. Okay, this is always the hardest question that I ask. My listeners all know what I'm going to say. They're probably mouthing it with me, but is there a question before we let you go that I should have asked you and didn't?
Oh, it's funny. As a journalist, that's often something that I ask. So I should have come prepared.
Makes you squirm, doesn't it? Yeah.
it's the job interview question at the end, I mean, I really think we did sort of cover the scope of the book. I mean, these were great questions, and I'll just say that the book, it travels from the 1950s through the decades to the present. It is a chronological history, but told through individual women's experiences, and hopefully it's a fast read. Yeah, I mean, I think you covered it.
Well, good. That's always so good to hear. It's been so fun to have you here. Thanks for taking time out. I know it's crazy, I'm sure, after just publishing and making the rounds. And I'm so glad we were able to help share your book with our listeners and get it in more people's hands or on their nightstands.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me on. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Okay, listeners, now it's up to you. So first of all, we're going to put the book, and the cover of the book is just so fun. I mean, it immediately screams, you need to pick this up, lady. So you should get this, and you can leave comments or questions, but I always love to hear, you loved this episode. Here's how it was helpful. These names, these things came to my mind when you were reading it. And the show notes will be flipping50.com/get-physical. Get physical. You got it. And what are you waiting for? Let's start flipping 50 today.